In the last lecture, we saw that we can extract the JWT payload from the request made to a protected route. The reason for that is we are attaching the JWT payload to the request whenever a logged in user tries to access a protected resource. Now in this lecture, we are going to create a decorator which will access the user payload from the request, and we can use it whenever we want to get access to the user payload in any of the protected routes. So let's go to VS Code, and in here, let's go to auth folder, and in the auth folder we have created this decorators folder. In this decorators folder I'm going to create a new decorator, and I'm going to call this decorator as active user dot decorator.ts. So this is the file name, and inside this we are going to create an active user decorator. So again, here I'm going to use this export const keyword. I'm going to call this function as active user. Okay, now here we want to create a parameter decorator. In order to create a parameter decorator, we have a function called create param decorator. Okay, so since we want to create a parameter decorator, we are going to use this create param decorator function. To this function, we need to pass a callback function like this, and this function, it is going to take two parameters. The first parameter will be any argument which we want to pass to this decorator. So for now, I'll simply call it as data, which is going to be of type string. And the second parameter will be the context of type execution context. And to use this execution context, this also we need to import from nestjs/common. So for now, these are the two parameters which I'm going to specify here. Now, let's say this data can be a string value, or it can also be undefined if no parameter is passed. Okay. Now, inside the body of this function, what do we want to do? From the context object, so here we have the context. From that, we want to switch to HTTP. So I will call this switch to HTTP function. And on that, we are going to call get request method. This is going to give us access to the request object. Let me go ahead and let me store it in a variable, and let me call it as request. And then from here, we are simply going to return request.user, because since we are going to access a protected route, for the protected route, the user will provide the JWT, and during the verification of that JWT, if the JWT is valid, its payload will be extracted and it will be assigned to this user object. This logic we have written inside this authorize guard at this line. All right, so this is our active user decorator. Now, wherever we want to get the user payload from the request, we can simply use this decorator. So for example, let me save the changes here. Let's go to tweet controller, and there now instead of using this request decorator, we are going to use our custom decorator, and the name of that decorator is active user. So in order to use it, we need to import it. I want to use this decorator, and I want to use it on this user parameter. Okay, so now when this endpoint will be called, at that time, this active user decorator will be called first. This decorator is going to return us the payload, the user object that will be assigned to this user. Now let's simply go ahead and let's log that user in the console just to test it. Now remember that since we are not passing any parameter to this active user, this data will be undefined. And anyway, we are not using it inside this function body. So let's go ahead and let's test this create tweet endpoint. And when we are going to call this endpoint, it should log this user in the console. Let's go to Postman, and let's go to create tweet. And if I send the request, let's go to the terminal now, and you will see that again, that user object, I mean the payload using which we created the JWT, that has been logged here. So this decorator, this active user decorator, it is properly returning us the payload from the request, and that payload is assigned to this user object. to this user parameter. Now let's go ahead and let's modify this active user decorator a little bit more. So let's say we are not interested in complete payload. Instead, let's say we want to create this decorator in such a way that it should take a field name. So let me call this data as field. So for example, for this field name, if email is passed, then in that case, this decorator should return the value of the email field. But if this field value is sub, in that case, it should return the value of the sub field. And we only want to allow users to pass only these two values for this field parameter. So here we are going to create a strict type, and for that, inside this auth folder, I'm going to create a new folder. I'll call it as interfaces, and inside this interfaces folder, I'm going to create a new file and I'll call it as active user type dot interface dot ts. Okay, and in here, let's go ahead and let's export an interface. Let's call this interface as active user type. Okay, and here we are going to specify two properties, sub. So in the payload, this sub property is storing the ID of the user. So this is going to be of type number, and another property will be email, and this is going to be of type string. Let's save the changes and let's go to active user decorator. So what we want is this field, it should contain a key from this active user type interface. So the field value should be either sub or email. It cannot be anything else. And to specify that, here we are going to specify the type of this field as key of. So this key of is an operator which checks if a value is a key of a given type or not. So here we want this field to be a key of active user type. And to use this active user type, we are also going to import it from this file. Or if no value is passed, in that case, this field will be undefined. All right. Now let's also go ahead and let's modify the definition here. So first we are reading the request. Now from this request, we are going to read the user property and I'm going to assign it to a variable. I'll call it as user. And this user again, it will be of type active user type. Okay. And now what we are going to do is we are going to check if this field, if it is a truthy value. That means for this field, we have received some value like email or sub. In that case, we want to read that field from the user object. So here we can say user, and here I'm going to use optional chaining so that if this user is undefined, we don't get any error. And on that, we are going to access the value of that field. So if this field is email, then this expression will give us the value of the email. If this field is sub, then this expression here, it will return us the value of sub. But if this field is undefined, then the condition itself will be falsy. In that case, we want to return the complete user object. That means we want to return the complete payload. And here, let's use the return keyword. I hope this logic is clear. With this, let's save the changes. Let's go back to Postman and let's send a post request to this endpoint again. If I send the request, currently we are not passing any value for the field parameter. So in that case, it should log the complete user object. As you can see here, now if I go back to VS Code and let's go to tweet controller, and there, when we are calling this active user, there, let me simply pass email. Let's save the changes. Let's go back to Postman. Let's make the request again. Let's go to terminal. This time you will see that it is only logging the value of the email. Let's go back to VS Code again. And instead of email, if I pass sub, let's save the changes. Let's go to the Postman again. And this time if I send the request, it should log the value of sub, which is 26. So we are assigning the sub property with the ID of the logged in user. And currently the logged in user is Mark Watt. And for him, the ID is 26. So that has been logged here. So using this active user decorator, we are able to read the complete payload, the complete user object from the request, or if we want, we can also read the value of email or sub by passing an argument to this active user decorator. If I pass something else here, for example, issued at, it will not take that value because here we are specifying that this field, it should be assigned with a key of active user type. And in the active user type, in this interface, we have only two keys, sub and email. So apart from these two values, if we try to pass any other value, we will get a compile time error like this. All right. So this is all I wanted to cover in this lecture. In the next lecture, what we are going to do is, let me save this file and let me close this interface and this authorize guard. So in the next lecture, what we are going to do is we are going to modify this tweet service, and instead of reading the user ID from the create tweet DTO, we are going to read this user ID from the request object. And for that, we are going to make use of this active user decorator. This is all from this lecture. If you have any questions from this lecture, then feel free to ask it. Thank you for listening and have a great day.